My name is Riley. I am 34 years old and my life is built on the careful assessment of risk. By day, I am a senior policy specialist for a commercial insurance firm in downtown Denver. My world is one of actuarial tables, liability clauses, and the precise language of consequence. I analyze the potential for disaster, a fleet of trucks on an icy mountain pass, a faulty sprinkler system in a warehouse full of flammable material, the fine print on a contractor's liability waiver. I am paid to see the cracks in a foundation before the building collapses. My job is to quantify what could go wrong and to create a bulwark of paper and legal precedent to protect against it. I am very, very good at my job. My house in the Harmony Grove HOA, a clean, minimalist space with a view of the distant Rockies, is a testament to this structured life. It is my sanctuary, a place where every object has a purpose and a place, where the only risks are the ones I choose, like whether to try a new hiking trail or open a bottle of expensive wine on a Tuesday. This fortress of quiet, ordered solitude is breached on average once every 3 months by a phone call from Karen Wilkins, the HOA president. It is the one risk I can never fully mitigate. Her name is Karen, but in my phone she is simply HOA Karen, a title that feels more like a formal designation than a term of endearment. Her husband, Gary, for the last 9 years, is the risk that has already defaulted, a walking, breathing, catastrophic loss. He is a man perpetually in between jobs, a phrase that suggests a brief transitional period rather than a permanent state of being. He is coarse in a way that seems almost studied, a performance of blue-collar authenticity from a man who hasn't worked a steady job since before I graduated college. He smells of cheap beer and resentment. His presence fills a room not with warmth but with a kind of dense gravitational pull drawing all energy and resources toward himself. He is the reason Karen calls. The requests are always framed in the language of community, a dialect I no longer speak fluently but can still understand. The neighborhood helps each other out. Riley, we're all we've got. It's just a little something to tide us over. The word community, in Karen's mouth, is not a noun. It is a verb, an action. And it is an action that only ever flows in one direction, from my bank account to hers. This dynamic was not forged overnight. It was solidified with a single sharp impact 8 years ago when I was 26. I was visiting their small, perpetually dim house. The air was thick with the smell of fried food and Karen's anxiety. She had asked for the 3rd time that week for my bank account's PIN, just so I can borrow a little for community supplies. Honey, Gary's disability check is late again. There was no disability check. There was never a disability check. There was only Gary sitting in his worn-out armchair watching a game show on a television that was far too large for the room. No, Karen, I had said, my voice firmer than I intended. I've told you I can send you money for supplies. I can buy them for you, but I am not giving you my PIN. She began to cry, the soft, weary tears of a practiced martyr. You're so cold, Riley. You always have been. You have a good job, a nice life. Why can't you just help your own neighborhood? From the armchair, Gary grunted. He muted the television with a click of the remote, and the sudden silence was more menacing than the noise. You heard Karen, he said, his voice a low rumble. She needs help. I've offered to help, I said, my heart starting to beat a little faster. I'm not giving her access to my entire account. He turned his head slowly, his eyes small and hard. You think you're better than us, don't you? With your fancy job in your little house. He stood up. Gary is not a large man, but he has a way of taking up space, of projecting a physical threat that transcends his actual size. He walked toward me, his steps heavy on the thin carpet. She is your HOA president. You show her some damn respect. This isn't about respect, Gary. It's about boundaries. Karen sobbed louder. See how she talks to me. It's selfish. I stood my ground. My hands clenched at my sides. I was in their space, a territory where my rules, my logic, my carefully constructed life meant nothing. Gary stopped in front of me so close I could smell the stale smoke on his breath. "She asked for the pin," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Give it to her." No. The word was barely out of my mouth before his hand came up. It wasn't a slap with an open palm. It was a backhand, hard and fast. The crack of his knuckles against my cheekbone echoed in the silent room. My head snapped to the side, my hair flying across my face. A bright, hot flash of pain exploded behind my eye. For a moment I saw stars, the kind you see in cartoons, little white bursts against a black background. I stumbled back, catching myself on the wall. The shock was so profound, so absolute that I couldn't even make a sound. It wasn't just the physical blow. It was the sheer audacity of it, the violation. I looked at Karen expecting horror, outrage, for her to rush to my side, to scream at him, to defend her neighbor. She did none of those things. She just stood there, her face streaked with tears, and said, "Well, maybe now you'll listen." In that moment something inside me broke. Or perhaps it didn't break. Perhaps it was forged into something harder, colder, and infinitely more durable. The part of me that had held out hope for a normal neighborhood relationship simply ceased to exist. It was cauterized by the blow and sealed by her betrayal. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I straightened up, my cheek throbbing, and walked out of the house without another word. I didn't speak to either of them for 6 months. But the silence couldn't last. It ended, as it always did, with a financial emergency. A text message. "Riley, honey," the transmission on the car went. "I don't know how I'll get to my HOA meetings. Please call me." And like a fool, I did. I paid for the car repairs. It was easier than fighting. It was easier than the guilt she was so adept at wielding. It was the price of peace. Since then, that has been our pattern. Months of low to no contact, a fragile truce maintained by distance, followed by a crisis, an unexpected medical bill, a rent increase, a problem Gary created that required my money to solve. Each time Karen would call, her voice laced with a carefully calibrated mixture of desperation and entitlement. She would praise my success, my intelligence, my competence, not as a source of pride but as a resource to be tapped. "You're so good with money, Riley. You always know what to do." And then, if I hesitated, the knives would come out. "I don't know why you have to be so selfish after everything the HOA has done for you. Gary says you think you're too good for the neighborhood now." Gary was always there, a shadow in the background, the beneficiary of my reluctant generosity. He never asked for anything himself. He didn't have to. He had Karen to do it for him. He reaped the rewards while I was branded the cold, selfish resident who had to be begged to help her own community. It was a perfect self-sustaining system of emotional and financial extortion. And I let it happen. I paid the price. Not out of love. Not anymore. I paid it as one pays a tax. A toll. A fee for existing in the HOA. I paid it to keep them at arm's length. I paid for the silence that would follow, the blessed temporary quiet in which I could rebuild my walls and live my own life. Until the next time. I had come to view these payments as a form of insurance, a premium paid against the larger, more catastrophic risk of having them fully ensconced in my life. It was a flawed policy. I knew the deductibles were getting higher and it never truly covered the damages. But it was the only policy I had until now. The text message arrived on a Tuesday morning, a digital harbinger of the chaos to come. It appeared on my screen just as I was finalizing a liability assessment for a new construction client. The contrast was almost poetic. On my dual monitors, a world of order, risk management, and contractual clarity. In my hand, A small, vibrating rectangle of pure, unmitigated liability. It was from Karen. Riley, honey, hope we're having a good week. Something wonderful has happened. Gary has a line on a great community project. A real opportunity, but he needs a truck. Call me when you get a minute. Blessings. I read it once, then a second time. I noted the familiar components. The overly cheerful opening, the vagueness of the opportunity, the casual deployment of the word needs, and the saccharine closing. It was a template, one she had used countless times for countless emergencies. I put the phone face down on my desk for 3 hours. I let it lie there, a dark mirror reflecting the fluorescent lights of my office. I finished my assessment, emailed it to my director, and took a deep, steadying breath. Only then did I walk to the small kitchenette, pour a cup of black coffee, and dial her number. She answered on the first ring, her voice a rush of manufactured excitement. Riley, honey, I'm so glad you called. Did you get my text? I got it. Karen. What's going on? It's the best news.
Gary met a guy.
A contractor who's getting more work than he can handle. He wants to subcontract some of it to Gary, framing, drywall, all the stuff he's so good at. It's a huge opportunity, a real chance for us to finally get ahead. I took a sip of my coffee. The bitter heat was grounding. Okay, so what's the issue? Well, there's no issue. Not really. It's just to do the work he needs a truck. You can't haul lumber and drywall in my little Civic. She laughed. A high, nervous sound. We found the perfect one. A 2014 Ford F-150. It's a real workhorse. The owner is an old guy who just used it for fishing trips. It's in great shape. He's only asking $8,000 for it, which is a steal. There it was. The price tag. The conversation always had a price tag. 8,000. I repeated, my voice flat. I know it sounds like a lot, honey, but this is an investment in our future, in his career. Her voice was getting louder, faster, the sales pitch hitting its stride. We can totally handle the monthly payments once he starts working. We figured it all out. It's just the down payment. The seller wants 40% down, and we don't have that right now. We need 3,200. Silence stretched between Denver and the suburb where she lived, a 30-mile expanse of static and unspoken history. I could hear Gary's muffled voice in the background, coaching her. Riley, are you still there? I'm here. He doesn't have the job yet, does he? This is the job. He just needs the truck to accept it. It's the only thing holding him back. Please, Riley, this is different. I can feel it. This is the one. This is the one. The official slogan of Karen's life with Gary. The one business idea that would take off. The one job that would stick. The one lucky break that was always just around the corner. Perpetually out of reach. I have to think about it, I said. It was my standard line. A verbal shield to buy myself time. Her voice immediately shifted from frantic excitement to wounded sorrow. Think about it? Riley, this isn't something we have time to think about. The seller has other offers. This is about your community. Sometimes you just have to have a little faith. Faith is a pre-existing condition that my policy doesn't cover. I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. That's not funny, she snapped. You're being cold. This is what you do. You get my hopes up and then you pull the rug out from under me. You're just like your father. The line went dead. She had hung up on me. It was the nuclear option in her arsenal of manipulation. Deployed when all else failed. It was designed to leave me stewing in a potent cocktail of guilt and anger. And for the next few days, it worked. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in my quiet, orderly house, staring at the ceiling. The conversation replaying in my head. The rational part of my brain, the part that wrote insurance policies, was screaming. It was a catastrophic risk. Gary's work history was a string of abandoned projects and burned bridges. Any money given to him was not an investment. It was a write-off, total loss. He was the human equivalent of a flooded, uninsured warehouse. And worse, he was the man who had hit me, a fact Karen had conveniently erased from our shared history. Giving him the means to establish a business felt like rewarding him for the very behavior that had severed the last real bond between the neighborhood and me. The answer had to be no. The next day the texts began. A link to the Craigslist ad for the truck. A picture of a silver F-150 that was, I had to admit, a decent-looking vehicle. It was parked in front of a neat suburban house, the very picture of reliability. Then came another text. Just imagine Gary being able to provide for us, to hold his head up high again. This could change everything for him. The words pricked at the tenderest part of my conscience. The part that, despite everything, still felt the gravitational pull of the word community. What if she was right? What if, against all odds, this was the one time it was real? My refusal wouldn't just be a no to a bad loan. It would be me actively standing in the way of their one chance at stability. If they failed, it would be my fault. She would make sure of it. I would carry that blame for years. Saying no meant a war of attrition, an endless siege of guilt-tripping texts and tearful phone calls. Saying yes was a one-time payment for a few months of peace. On the third day something shifted. I was at my desk reviewing a complex commercial auto policy for a logistics company. My screen was filled with clauses about primary ownership, permitted use, liability coverage for contracted drivers, and the legal recourse for misuse of a company asset. I was reading a section on how a vehicle owned by the corporation but assigned to a driver remains the undisputed property of the corporation. The driver had rights to use it, but not to own it. Any deviation from the agreed-upon use constituted a breach of contract. And then it hit me. A thought so cold, so clear, so perfectly structured that it felt like it came from the deepest part of my professional mind, not my messy emotional heart. I had been looking at this as a neighborhood problem, a messy tangle of obligation and resentment. I needed to look at it as an insurance problem of risk management. The risk wasn't the money. I could afford the $3,200. It would sting, but it wouldn't break me. The real risk was the lack of control. The risk was handing over a valuable asset and having no say in what happened to it. No recourse when the inevitable disaster struck. The risk was playing by their rules. What if I said yes, but played by my rules? I picked up the phone and called Karen. Her voice was sullen, guarded. What do you want? Riley, I've thought about it, I said, my tone calm and businesslike. I'll help you with the truck. A pause, then a flood of relieved gratitude. Oh, honey, thank you. I knew you'd come through for us. You won't regret this. Promise. Gary is so happy. I cut her off. But I have conditions. They are not negotiable. The line went quiet. Conditions. Yes. Condition 1. I will not be giving you the money for the down payment. I will handle the entire transaction myself. The auto loan for the remaining balance will be taken out in my name. The truck's registration and title will be in my name and my name only, on paper and in the eyes of the law. It will be my truck. She sputtered. But it's for Gary. This is the only way I can secure the financing. He lied smoothly. My credit is excellent, but banks are wary of third-party payments. Legally, the person on the loan must be the person on the title. It's a standard anti-fraud measure. It's just paperwork. Karen, a formality. You said yourself that you'd transfer the title to him after it's paid off. This just makes that process cleaner down the road. I could hear her whispering to Gary. I heard his angry, muffled reply. Then Karen came back on the line, her voice hesitant. Okay. Honey, if that's how it has to be, it is, I said. Condition 2, the insurance. Since Gary intends to use the truck for work, a personal auto policy won't cover him. If he gets into an accident while on a job, a personal insurer would deny the claim and we would lose the entire investment. The truck must have a commercial auto policy. A what? Doesn't that cost more? It does. And I will pay for the first 6 months. It's the only way to properly insure the asset. Protects me. Protects him. And it protects the truck itself. It is non-negotiable. This is what I do for a living, Karen. Trust me on this. She didn't have a choice. She wanted the truck. And I was the one with the checkbook. I had framed the conditions not as a matter of trust but as a matter of legal and financial prudence. I was no longer the reluctant neighbor. I was the project manager, the underwriter. Okay, Riley, she finally said, the fight gone from her voice. Okay, we agree. 2 days later I met the seller in a bank parking lot. Gary and Karen were there, standing off to the side, buzzing with proprietary excitement that grated on my nerves. Gary clapped his hands together, eyeing the F-150 like a conquest. I ignored them. I spoke only to the seller, a pleasant retired man named George. I reviewed the title, checked the VIN, and handed him a cashier's check for $3,200. I signed the loan paperwork for my credit union right there on the hood of his old car. As I held the new key fob in my hand, I felt a strange calm settle over me. It wasn't the familiar sinking feeling of being taken advantage of. It wasn't the hollow victory of having bought a few months of peace. It was something else entirely. It was the cold, clean feeling of a contract being executed. I had just acquired an asset. I had underwritten a new policy, and I had a very clear understanding of all the clauses covering breach and liability. The Saturday I drove the truck to their house was bright and clear. One of those perfect Colorado autumn days where the sky is a deep cloudless blue and the air has a crisp edge. The F-150 handled smoothly, its engine a low, confident hum. For a moment, just a moment, I understood the appeal. There was a sense of power, of capability in commanding a machine like this. I was an agent of delivery, a facilitator of the great opportunity that was supposed to change their lives. But the folder on the passenger seat beside me was a stark reminder of my true role. I was not a facilitator. I was an underwriter, and I was here to finalize the terms of the policy. I pulled into their driveway, the tires crunching on the loose gravel. The garage door was already open, a dark mouth waiting to swallow the vehicle. Gary was standing just inside, arms crossed over his chest, a wide, proprietary grin on his face. Karen hovered behind him, wringing her hands in a gesture of nervous excitement that had been her default setting for as long as I could remember. Gary's grin widened as I stepped out of the truck. There she is. Atta girl. Riley. Knew you'd do the right thing. He slapped the hood of the truck, a gesture of ownership that sent a tremor of irritation through me. It's a nice truck, Gary, I said, my voice even. I reached back inside and grabbed the leather folder. I just have some paperwork for you to sign and then it's all set. His smile faltered. He squinted at the folder in my hand. Paperwork? What the hell for? The deal's done. You bought the truck. I bought the truck. Yes, I confirmed, walking toward him. This is just a simple agreement outlining its use. A vehicle use agreement. It's for the insurance. The commercial policy requires it. I was leveraging the same excuse as before, cloaking my caution in the impenetrable armor of corporate bureaucracy. Karen stepped forward. Oh, honey, is that really necessary? We're family. It's because we're family that I want to make sure everything is done correctly. Karen, this protects all of us. It just confirms that Gary is the designated driver for work purposes and that you'll both ensure it's used according to the terms of the commercial insurance. It takes 2 minutes to sign. I opened the folder. I had drafted the document myself using a standard corporate template. It was 1 page long, written in clear, simple English. It stated that the vehicle, property of Riley Bennett, was being provided to Gary Wilkins for provisional use with specific clauses about legal and safe operation. Gary let out a short barking laugh. He didn't even look at the paper. "Oh, for Christ's sake. You don't need to do all this. Don't make a federal case out of it. Just give me the keys." He held out his hand, palm up, expectant. I didn't move. I kept the folder open, a clipboard with the document and a pen held firmly in my hands. "I need you to sign this, Gary. And Karen, I need you to sign as a witness." His eyes narrowed. The good old boy facade was cracking, revealing the brittle impatience beneath. "I ain't signing. This is my truck. We had a deal." "We did," I said, my voice losing none of its calm. I had rehearsed this in my mind. My pulse was steady. I was a professional handling a difficult client. And our deal was that I would purchase the truck. The title and registration are in my name. Legally, it is my truck. I am letting you use it as we agreed. This document simply confirms that arrangement. I had made a critical error. I had spoken the truth. I had stated the legal reality of the situation out loud in his space, in front of his wife. I had held up a mirror to his dependency, and he could not stand the reflection. His face darkened, a flush of red creeping up his neck. "Your truck? You think you can just hold this over my head forever? I'm the one who's going to be working my ass off with this thing. Not you. That's not what this is about." "The hell it isn't. You've been like this your whole goddamn life. Always thinking you're smarter than everyone else. Looking down your nose at us." He took a step closer, jabbing a finger at my face. "You're not my boss, little girl. You don't get to give me rules." "Gary, stop it," Karen said, her voice weak, pleading. "She's just being careful." "Careful?" He spat, turning on her. "She's being a bitch is what she is." He turned back to me, his gaze full of a familiar, ugly fire, the same fire I'd seen in his eyes 8 years ago. "Now give me the keys. Not until you sign the agreement, Gary. It's a reasonable request." I asked the question a second time. I clarified the terms of ownership a second time, and that was when the negotiation ended. With a roar of frustration he lunged. Not at me, but at the clipboard in my hands. He ripped it from my grasp, the papers scattering across the greasy concrete floor of the driveway. "There's your goddamn agreement," he yelled. I instinctively bent down to pick up the pages. It was a mistake. As I straightened up, he was already moving. He turned and grabbed the nearest object, a long wooden dowel that served as the handle for a push broom leaning against the wall. He wrenched it free from the broom head. He held it like a baseball bat. Everything slowed down. I saw Karen's eyes widen, her hand flying to her mouth. I saw the muscles in Gary's jaw clench. I saw the handle, worn smooth from use, arcing through the air toward me. I had no time to think, only to react. I threw my left arm up to shield my head. The impact was a sickening hollow thud. A bolt of white-hot electric pain shot from my wrist all the way up to my shoulder. It was so sharp, so intense, it stole my breath. I cried out, a strangled gasp, and staggered backward, clutching my arm. The wooden handle had caught me directly across the ulna bone. I looked down at my wrist, a wave of nausea washing over me. A dark, angry red welt was already rising on my skin. I could feel the bone beneath screaming in protest. I looked up at Gary. He was standing there, breathing heavily, the handle still gripped in his hand. His face was a mask of rage. Then I looked at Karen. Karen, who stood frozen by the door into the kitchen. Her face was not filled with horror or fear for my safety or anger at her husband. It was a strange, tight mask of resentment. And then she spoke, her voice cutting through the ringing in my ears. delivering a verdict more painful than the physical blow. "You deserve that," she said. "You always have to push. You always have to be in control." The pain in my arm was a distant fire. The real injury was her words. They landed in the center of my chest, a shard of ice that stopped my heart for a beat. "You deserved that." The final, irrevocable confirmation of a truth I had spent my entire adult life trying to deny. I was alone. She would not protect me. She would never choose me. The rage I expected to feel didn't come. The tears I thought might fall never materialized. In their place, something else rose up. A profound, crystalline calm. A clarity so absolute it felt like a religious experience. The underwriter in my head, the woman who assessed risk, took complete control. The emotional policy I had held with Karen was now null and void. The contract was breached. All clauses of neighborhood obligation were terminated, effective immediately. I didn't say a word. I lowered my injured arm, cradling it against my stomach. My eyes met Karen's for a fraction of a second. There was nothing there for me. I turned and looked at Gary, who was still panting, a triumphant sneer on his face. He thought he had won. He thought he had put me in my place. Without a word, I turned and walked out of the driveway. I walked down the gravel path, past the silver truck that sat gleaming in the autumn sun. I did not look back. I pulled my phone from my pocket with my good hand, my fingers moving with a steady, deliberate purpose. I opened the Uber app, my thumb shaking slightly, but I tapped the screen. My location already pinged. Car was 4 minutes away. As I stood on the sidewalk waiting, a drop of blood welled up from a scrape on my wrist where the skin had broken. It traced a thin crimson line down my forearm. I watched it, fascinated. It was evidence not for the police, for me. It was the final signature on a contract that had just been terminated, the period at the end of a long, painful chapter. The car pulled up to the curb. I got in, closed the door, and didn't look back. The war had just begun. The Uber driver, a young man with kind eyes, asked if I was okay. He must have seen me cradling my arm, seen the single damning track of blood.
"Just a stupid accident," I murmurat.
My voice sounding foreign in my own ears. I slammed my arm in a door. He nodded, accepting the lie, and turned his attention back to the road. The lie was not for him. It was for me, a rehearsal. The first brick in the wall of a new narrative I was constructing. One where I was not a victim, but a strategist. The first thing I did when I got back to my house was go to the bathroom. Under the cold, clinical light, I examined my wrist. The welt was now a swollen purplish ridge. The pain was a deep throbbing ache, a constant physical reminder of the breach. I carefully washed the blood away, disinfected the scrape, and wrapped my wrist tightly in an elastic bandage. I took 4 ibuprofen from the medicine cabinet, swallowing them dry. I was compartmentalizing. The physical injury was an event to be managed, not a trauma to be indulged. My mind was preternaturally clear. The emotional shock had burned away like a fog, leaving behind a landscape of stark, logical choices. Calling the police was not one of them. I played out the scenario in my head with the dispassionate analysis of a claims adjuster reviewing a fraudulent report. I could see it unfold. The police arriving at their cluttered house. Karen weeping, telling them her neighbor had always been difficult, prone to exaggeration. Gary, contrite and plausible, would say, "I flew into a rage over a simple misunderstanding about paperwork, that she tripped and fell against the wall, that he would never ever lay a hand on me. It would be a classic," he said. She said, "A messy domestic squabble they would be eager to close. They would see a hysterical woman and her long-suffering neighbors. They would see a dispute over a truck, not an assault. They would file a report perhaps, and tell us to sort it out amongst ourselves." Calling the police would be an act of emotional catharsis, not a strategic move. And I was done with emotion. I was interested in consequences. Instead of dialing 911, I dialed the direct line of Arthur Vance. Arthur was a senior partner at a law firm that specialized in insurance litigation. We weren't friends, but we were professional allies. I had served as an expert consultant for his firm on a few complex policy interpretation cases, and he had in turn recommended my firm for underwriting some of his clients' more esoteric risks. Our relationship was built on a foundation of mutual respect for each other's competence. He answered on the third ring. Vance. His voice was crisp, efficient. Arthur, it's Riley Bennett. I apologize for calling on a Saturday, but I need to retain your services. I have a situation involving the misuse of a commercially insured asset and a breach of a provisional lease agreement. I used the language we both understood. I presented it as a professional problem, not a personal crisis. There was a brief pause. Riley, everything all right? This sounds specific. It is, I said, my voice steady. Can you meet me on Monday morning, 9 a.m.? My office. He confirmed. No further questions asked. He recognized the tone. It was the sound of a problem that would be billable. The rest of the weekend was a study in controlled action. The pain in my arm was a useful metronome, keeping my focus sharp. My first step was to establish the legal framework. I went through my sent emails and found it, dated the day after I had purchased the truck. The subject line was clear. Agreement for vehicle use, Gary's copy. The body of the email was concise.
Igay.
For the commercial insurance policy to be valid, the insurer requires a basic confirmation of the terms of use for the primary driver. Please review the attached one-page PDF and reply to this email with OK to confirm you have received it and agree to the terms. This is just a formality for their records. Thanks, Riley. And there, at the bottom of the chain, was his reply, sent from his phone 2 hours later. A single 2-letter word. OK. I printed the entire email chain and the attached PDF. It was my cornerstone. Next, I called the 24/7 client services line for my commercial auto insurance policy. I was calm, professional. My name is Riley Bennett. I'm the policyholder for a 2014 Ford F-150. I need to activate the telematics and GPS tracking service on the vehicle. I have some concerns about unauthorized use by the designated driver. The agent was helpful and efficient. The premium policy I had selected included the service as an add-on. It was designed for business owners to monitor their fleets. Within an hour, I had a login and password for a web portal. A blue dot appeared on a map of the Denver metro area. It was parked in the driveway of Karen's house. I watched it, unblinking, for a full 10 minutes. The asset was now under surveillance. For the next week, I lived a double life. By day, I was Riley Bennett, senior policy specialist, attending meetings, writing reports, my bandaged wrist hidden by the sleeve of my blazer. By night, I became a different kind of analyst. I monitored the blue dot on the screen. I saw it travel to construction sites, to Home Depot, to cheap bars in the evenings. Gary was using it exactly as he intended. He was working, but he wasn't working legally. My opportunity came on Thursday. The GPS tracker showed the truck was parked in a semi-industrial area on the outskirts of the city, a place known for its unregulated lumber yards. I left work early, my professional camera with its telephoto lens on the passenger seat of my car. I parked 2 blocks away and walked, my heart a cold,
Steady drum.
and there it was, the silver F-150. The bed was loaded, overloaded, in fact with raw, unfinished lumber. There were no straps, no red flag on the pieces that extended far beyond the tailgate. Gary and another man were hauling the wood out of a dilapidated warehouse. Their movements hurried, furtive. This wasn't a legitimate job site. This was a cash-only, off-the-books transaction. Hauling raw, unsecured timber for an unlicensed operation was a flagrant violation of at least a dozen clauses in the commercial policy. Worse, it violated half the HOA bylaws: unsightly materials, improper parking, noise complaints waiting to happen. I raised my camera. The telephoto lens brought the scene into sharp focus. I took 23 pictures. Gary's face sweating with exertion. The overloaded truck bed. The license plate clearly visible. Each click of the shutter was a nail being hammered into his coffin, and, by extension, into Karen's precious community standards. She loved to preach, while her husband turned the neighborhood into his personal junkyard. On Monday morning, at precisely 9 a.m., I sat across from Arthur Vance in his corner office. The view of the mountains was spectacular, but I paid it no mind. I laid out the documents on his polished mahogany desk in a neat, ordered row. The title and registration in my name, the commercial auto policy in my name, the printed email chain with Gary's 2-letter acceptance, and finally a series of 8 by 10 glossy photos of the truck being used to haul unsecured lumber, right past the HOA no unsightly storage sign. I explained the situation with clinical detachment. I did not mention the assault. That was not relevant to this stage of the plan. I was not a resident who had been attacked by her neighbor's husband. I was the owner of a significant asset whose provisional lease agreement had been violated by the user. I was a policyholder whose insured property was being put at extreme risk. Arthur listened, his steepled fingers resting on his chin. He examined each document, his eyes missing nothing. He looked at the email. He looked at Gary's, okay. He looked at the photos. When I was finished, he leaned back in his leather chair. "He's an idiot," Arthur said, not as an insult but as a legal assessment. An email response can absolutely constitute a binding agreement, especially when the terms are this clear and the subject is commercial in nature. This isn't a casual text message. You sent him a formal document and requested a specific form of confirmation. He provided it. He tapped the photos. And this is a gift. Misuse of a commercial vehicle for illicit purposes. It's a material breach. You are well within your rights to terminate the agreement and demand the immediate return of your property. "That's what I want to do," I said. "I want to send him a formal demand letter, a notice to cure or quit." Cure in this case would be returning the vehicle. Arthur clarified. "There's no other way for him to remedy the breach. We'll give him 14 days. It's a reasonable time frame. We'll send it via certified mail and email. We will create a paper trail so clear a first-year law student could follow it to a guilty verdict." He was already drafting the letter on his computer. The language was sharp, precise, and unforgiving. It cited the personal property lease agreement established via email on the specific date. It detailed the breach of contract, referencing the misuse of the vehicle for activities not covered by the commercial insurance policy, thereby putting the asset at significant financial risk. It formally demanded the return of the 2014 Ford F-150, license plate number XXX, to its legal owner Riley Bennett within 14 calendar days of receipt of the notice. Failure to comply, the letter concluded, would result in legal action to recover the property along with damages and legal fees. That afternoon, a courier delivered the letter to a certified mail center. I sent the email myself from my personal account. The subject line was unequivocal: formal notice, demand for return of vehicle. I attached the letter as a PDF. Then I set up a rule in my inbox. Any reply from his email address would be automatically marked as read and archived into a special folder named Evidence. I would not read his excuses. I would not engage with his anger. I had made my move. The trap was set. Now I would simply watch the blue dot on the map and wait for him to walk right into it. The 14-day grace period stipulated in Arthur's letter began on a Tuesday. For Gary, it was a Tuesday like any other. The certified letter arrived, was signed for by Karen, and I can only assume was either thrown in the trash or used as a coaster. The email I sent sat in his inbox, likely unread or read and dismissed with a contemptuous laugh. To a man like Gary, a letter from a lawyer is just a scare tactic, a bluff. He operates in a world of physical intimidation and verbal bluster. The nuanced binding power of contractual language is a foreign concept to him. He could not comprehend that the 2 letters he had just ignored were not the opening shots of a negotiation. They were the procedural announcement of his defeat. I did not wait for a response. I did not expect one. My strategy was built on the solid foundation of his arrogance. My silence was the critical element. It was a vacuum into which he would pour his assumptions. He would assume I was sulking. He would assume I was waiting for an apology. He would assume that eventually I would get over it because that is what I had always done. He did not know that the Riley who got over it had ceased to exist in his driveway. The person watching him now was someone else entirely, a dispassionate observer collecting data points for a risk analysis report. Every morning I made coffee and opened the telematics portal on my laptop. The blue dot representing the F-150 was my morning paper. I watched it leave their house between 6 and 6:30 a.m. I watched it travel to job sites, a new housing development in Aurora, a commercial renovation in Lakewood. I watched it stop at gas stations, fast food restaurants, and most evenings a dingy bar called the Watering Hole for 2 to 3 hours before making its final journey home. The app was a marvel of passive surveillance. It tracked speed, braking patterns, and idle times. I knew he had a habit of accelerating too quickly. I knew he idled the engine for an average of 12 minutes a day. I was building a detailed, irrefutable log of his every professional move in my asset. On the 5th day, a Friday, Karen called. I saw her name flash on the screen and let it go to voicemail. The message she left was a masterpiece of passive aggression. Riley, honey, it's me. Just calling to see if you've cooled off yet. Gary's job is going so well. He's working so hard. That truck was the best thing that ever happened to us. I hope you can be happy for him. It would be a shame to let a little misunderstanding ruin things. Call me. I archived the voicemail without listening to it a second time. It was another data point. They were proceeding under the assumption that the status quo held. They believed the truck was theirs. A gift wrested from a difficult resident, and that my anger was a temporary storm that would pass. The days ticked by 7, 10, 12. The blue dot on the map became a predictable looping pattern, the digital signature of a man digging his own grave with the shovel I had provided. I added the GPS logs to my file. Each day a new entry, a new page in the growing testament to his breach of contract. He was in flagrant violation of the notice to quit. He was, in the cold language of the law, unlawfully retaining possession of my property. The final piece of evidence I needed arrived on the morning of the 13th day. It did not come from a stroke of luck, but from a calculated use of my professional network. I had a contact, Mark, a field adjuster for another firm who often worked accident scenes in the same industrial zones Gary frequented. I had sent him a text a week prior. Hey Mark, quick question. Doing a risk assessment on a contractor. If you happen to be in the Aurora Industrial Park and see a silver 2014 F-150 plate XXX, could you snap a pic for my file? Just need to verify worksite compliance.
No rus.
It was a standard, innocuous request between colleagues. On Monday morning my phone buzzed with an incoming picture message from Mark. The text above it read, "Saw your guy. Definitely not compliant. You owe me a beer." The photograph was perfect. It was a masterpiece of stupidity, portrait of liability. The F-150 was parked egregiously in a designated fire lane, its front bumper almost touching a red-painted curb. But that wasn't the worst of it. The truck bed, designed for materials, was filled with people. Gary was in the driver's seat, but in the back, Sitting on the wheel wells and the floor of the bed were at least 5 other men, clearly laborers being transported from one site to another. Transporting passengers in the open bed of a truck is illegal in Colorado. The vehicle's passenger capacity was 5. He was carrying at least double that. He was parked illegally. He was operating an unsafe and unlawful passenger transport. And he was doing it all in my commercially insured vehicle, right in front of the HOA no parking in fire lane sign that Karen herself had insisted on installing. I saved the image. I thanked Mark and promised him a steak dinner. Not just a beer. This was the capstone. This was not just a breach of our private agreement. This was a public safety hazard, a blatant violation of traffic law. This elevated the situation from a civil dispute to a matter of potential criminal negligence. The 14-day period expired at midnight. On Tuesday morning, the 15th day, I did not go into the office. I worked from home. I opened the file on my computer, a folder now dense with carefully organized evidence. I took a deep breath and began to assemble my attack. It would be two-pronged, a pincer movement of bureaucratic and legal force. The first prong was aimed at the insurance company. I drafted an email to the head of the Special Investigations Unit, a man I knew by reputation. The subject was Urgent Policyholder Report of Material Misrepresentation and Unlawful Use of Insured Asset, Policy Number 774C. In the email, I identified myself as the policyholder. I stated that I had conclusive evidence that the designated driver, Gary Wilkins, was not engaged in the subcontracting work he had claimed but was instead operating an unlicensed and uninsured taxi service for day laborers. In addition to hauling illicit materials, I attached the photos of the lumber. I attached the new photo of the men in the truck bed. I attached the GPS log showing his daily patterns. I attached a copy of the violated vehicle use agreement and the ignored demand for return letter. I concluded by stating that, as the policyholder, I was formally reporting this activity to mitigate the insurer's exposure to the catastrophic liability risk Mr. Wilkins was creating on a daily basis. I requested they immediately open a fraud investigation. The insurance company's legal and investigative teams are notoriously aggressive. They are corporate sharks that smell blood in the water, and I had just thrown a bucket of chum into their pool. They would descend on this policy with a speed and ferocity Gary could not possibly comprehend. The second prong was more significant. It was aimed at the justice system. I did not go to the police. I went to the district attorney. I compiled a second, separate package. It was a formal citizen's complaint. I wrote a cover letter, its tone respectful but firm. I outlined the facts, again with clinical precision. I established my legal ownership of the vehicle. I established the existence of a lease agreement, however informal. I detailed Gary's refusal to return the property after a formal, legally delivered demand to do so. I characterized his continued use of the truck not as a misunderstanding but as the crime of unauthorized use of a motor vehicle. I further alleged conversion of property, the civil tort for theft, arguing that his actions demonstrated an intent to permanently deprive me of my asset. I attached every piece of evidence, the title, the agreement, the photos, the certified mail receipt, the GPS logs. It was a complete, prepackaged case, an investigator's dream, told a clear, linear story of a man who had been given a provisional privilege, had violated the terms of that privilege, and was now, in effect, in possession of a stolen vehicle. I added a final crucial note. I mentioned that the dispute had begun with a physical assault and that I would be willing to provide a full statement regarding that incident should it be relevant to their investigation into Mr. Wilkins's character and propensity for violence. I sealed the package. I drove to the county courthouse and hand-delivered it to the intake desk at the DA's office. Returning to my house, I sat at my laptop and opened the GPS tracker one more time. The blue dot was moving along a highway heading toward another job site. Gary was driving my truck. blissfully unaware that he was no longer just a contractor. He was now the subject of two separate official investigations, a target for a corporate legal team and a person of interest to the county prosecutor. He thought he was in a fight with his neighbor. He had no idea he was now at war with the unblinking, methodical systems of insurance and law. He was a man holding a broom handle in a gunfight, and he didn't even hear the shots that had been fired. The systems I had set in motion did not move with the messy, unpredictable speed of human emotion. They moved with a cold, bureaucratic deliberation. For a week I heard nothing. The blue dot on my screen continued its daily pilgrimage, a testament to Gary's obliviousness. He was a man whistling in a graveyard, unaware that the headstones bore his name. I felt no impatience, only a quiet certainty. I had filed a claim, and now the great grinding gears of the institutional machine were beginning to turn. The first notice arrived on a Wednesday, exactly 8 days after I delivered my package to the district attorney. It was not from the county but from my own industry. It was a letter from the insurance company. A crisp white envelope addressed to Gary Wilkins, designated operator for policy number 774C, at Karen's address. A copy was also sent to me, the policyholder, which I received via a secure digital portal. I read my copy first. It was a thing of brutal corporate beauty. The letter was a notice of policy rescission. Rescission is a step beyond cancellation. Cancellation terminates a policy from a certain date forward. Rescission declares it void from its inception, as if it never existed. The letter cited, in dense legalese, material misrepresentation and concealment of fact during the application process and engagement in activities which materially increase the risk of loss beyond the scope of the underwritten agreement. It went on to state that due to the fraudulent nature of the vehicle's use, the policy was considered void ab initio from the beginning. All premiums I had paid would be refunded. More importantly, it declared that any and all incidents that may have occurred since the policy's inception were now uninsured. Had he so much as scratched a fender in a parking lot, he would now be personally, solely, and infinitely liable. But the most potent venom was in the final paragraph. It informed him that the vehicle's VIN had been entered into the National Insurance Crime Bureau, NICB, database, flagged for association with a high-risk fraudulent policy. This was the digital equivalent of a brand on the forehead. Any future attempt to insure that specific vehicle by any carrier in the country would now trigger an immediate invasive investigation. The F-150 was, for all intents and purposes, uninsurable. It was now just a very large, very expensive paperweight. I imagined Karen reading the letter over Gary's shoulder, her face collapsing in confusion and fear. I imagined Gary, his face turning a blotchy red, dismissing it as more of Riley's nonsense, not yet understanding that this letter did not come from me. It came from a multi-billion-dollar corporation whose investigators had looked at my evidence and rendered their verdict. His reaction was predictable. Men like Gary, when faced with a problem they cannot punch, try to seize control through a show of ownership. The letter must have spooked him enough to finally act on the one thing he believed would secure his position, the title. On Friday of that week, armed with a bill of sale he had likely forged himself, he drove my truck to the Department of Motor Vehicles. He would have waited in line, radiating impatience, clutching a document he thought was his trump card. He would have finally reached the counter, slid the paper under the glass, and told the clerk he was there to transfer the title and get new plates. The clerk, patient, middle-aged woman, would have typed the VIN into her computer. And then she would have paused. Her brow would have furrowed. She would have looked at her screen and then back at Gary. "I'm sorry, sir," she would have said, her voice neutral. "There appears to be a hold on this vehicle's registration." "A hold? What the hell does that mean?" he would have demanded, his voice rising. It means we cannot process any registration or title changes for this vehicle at this time. There's a flag on the VIN from the NICB. And it looks like there's also a notice of pending legal action filed by the registered owner. I can't give you any more information than that. You'll have to resolve those issues before we can do anything. I can see him standing there, his face a thundercloud of impotent rage. He could yell at the clerk, but she would just stare back at him, protected by a pane of plexiglass and the full weight of the state government. He could demand to see a supervisor who would tell him the exact same thing. He was trapped. The system, my system, was working perfectly. The truck was in his possession, but it was not and could never be his. It was a ghost in his driveway, constant, gleaming reminder of his powerlessness. That weekend must have been tense in their little house. The gears of his small mind would have been grinding, trying to process what was happening. He was being attacked by paper, by computer screens, by forces he couldn't see or threaten. He would have blamed me, of course. He would have paced their small living room, ranting to Karen about how I was trying to ruin him, how I was crazy, vindictive. And Karen, trapped between her bully of a husband and the consequences of his actions, would have wept and pleaded with him to just give the truck back and apologize. But he would never do that. His pride wouldn't allow it. The final act began the following Tuesday, exactly 1 week after the insurance notice arrived. It was late afternoon. I know this because the GPS tracker showed the truck had been parked in their driveway since 4:15 p.m. At 5:30 p.m., a different kind of vehicle arrived. It was a marked police car. 2 uniformed officers got out. They did not rush to the door with their hands on their weapons. This wasn't a raid. It was a service of process, a formal, almost mundane bureaucratic procedure. They walked up the cracking concrete path and knocked on the door. Karen would have answered, her face etched with a permanent state of anxiety. I imagine her shock, the way her hand would have flown to her chest at the sight of the uniforms. They would have asked for Gary Wilkins. He would have swaggered to the door, his demeanor a mix of bravado and apprehension. Yeah, what's this about? Are you Gary Wilkins? The senior officer would have asked. Yeah. The officer would have held out a thick envelope. Sir, you are being served. This is a summons to appear in the County of Denver District Court. Gary would have stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. A summons for what? The officer, patient and professional, would have gestured at the papers. It's all in there, sir. My job is just to deliver it. You have been named in a civil complaint. The charges listed are conversion of private property, breach of a lease agreement, and let's see. He would have squinted at his clipboard, and a petition for a civil protection order citing a history of violent conduct related to the ongoing civil dispute. You are required to appear in court on the date listed to answer the complaint. Have a good evening, sir. And then they would have turned and walked away, leaving Gary standing in his doorway, holding the physical manifestation of all his bad decisions. He would have torn the envelope open, his hands shaking with rage. He would have read the legal language, the formal accusations, my name listed as the plaintiff. He would have seen the specific dates, the references to the email, the demand letter, and he would have seen the line that tied it all together. The mention of his violence, not as a separate criminal charge but as a supporting fact in a civil case. A piece of his character entered into the official court record. He was no longer just in trouble with his neighbor. He had been officially engaged by the legal system. He was on their docket. He was in their files. The world of consequences, a world I inhabited every single day, had finally, irrevocably found him. The courtroom was small, airless, and smelled faintly of dust and old coffee. It was a place designed for the mundane business of the law, traffic violations, small claims, the untangling of messy civil disputes. It lacked the gravitas of a criminal court, but the power it held was no less absolute. The judge, a woman in her late 50s with a face set in a permanent expression of weary patience, presided from a raised dais. Her name was Judge Alani, and she looked like a woman who had heard every possible excuse and was impressed by none of them. Gary had chosen to represent himself. It was an act of supreme arrogance and financial short-sightedness. He sat at the respondent's table in a cheap, ill-fitting suit that was a size too tight in the shoulders. He looked like a man playing dress-up, his usual bluster replaced by a sullen, defensive posture. Karen sat behind him in the small gallery, her hands clutching a worn handbag in her lap. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her, a ghost haunting the scene of a car crash she had helped cause.
He sat beside Arthur Vance.
My own suit was perfectly tailored. My hair was pulled back in a neat chignon. I was the picture of professional composure. Arthur had arranged his files on the table with a surgeon's precision. He was calm, focused, and utterly unimpressed by the melodrama unfolding across the aisle. The proceedings began. Judge Alani's voice was a monotone. We are here to hear the complaint filed by Ms. Riley Bennett against Mr. Gary Wilkins regarding the matter of a 2014 Ford F-150. Mr. Wilkins, you are the respondent. Ms. Bennett, you are the plaintiff. I have read the initial filings. Mr. Vance, you may begin. Arthur stood. Thank you, Your Honor. The facts of this case are remarkably straightforward. My client, Ms. Bennett, is the sole legal owner of the vehicle in question. The title, registration, and financing are all exclusively in her name. We have submitted certified copies of these documents for the record. He gestured to a file on the clerk's desk. Ms. Bennett agreed to permit Mr. Wilkins the provisional use of this vehicle for work purposes. This agreement was contingent on the vehicle being used safely, legally, and in accordance with the terms of the commercial insurance policy Ms. Bennett secured for it. Mr. Wilkins violated these terms repeatedly. When Ms. Bennett formally requested the return of her property, he refused. He has for the past month remained in unlawful possession of my client's asset. Judge Alani looked at Gary. Mr. Wilkins, your response. Gary stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the linoleum floor. This is a load of crap, Your Honor. This is a neighborhood thing. This is my truck. She bought it for me. It was a gift. Now, because she got her feelings hurt over a little argument, she's trying to take it back. She's crazy. Vindictive. So it is your contention that the vehicle was a gift? The judge asked, her pen poised over a legal pad. Damn right it was, Gary said. There was never no agreement. That's just something she and her fancy lawyer made up. Arthur Vance remained standing, his expression placid. Your Honor, if I may proceed. Mr. Vance. Mr. Wilkins claims there was no agreement. We contend there was. In fact, we have a copy of the agreement which was transmitted to Mr. Wilkins via email on the afternoon of October 12th. Arthur picked up a single sheet of paper from his table and approached the clerk to have it marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit D. A copy was handed to the judge and another to a fuming Gary Wilkins. This is Exhibit D, Your Honor. It is a printout of an email sent from my client to the respondent. As you can see, the subject line is clear and unambiguous. Agreement for vehicle use, Gary's copy. The body of the email asks Mr. Wilkins to review an attached one-page document and reply with OK to confirm his receipt and acceptance of the terms for the insurance record. Gary scoffed, crumpling the paper in his fist. This is garbage. I get 100 emails a day. I don't remember this. The judge looked at him over the top of her reading glasses. Uncrumple that document and look at it, Mr. Wilkins. Now Gary reluctantly smoothed the paper out. Mr. Vance, The judge continued, "You mentioned an attachment." "Yes, Your Honor," Arthur said. "The attachment, which we have entered as Exhibit C, is the one-page vehicle use agreement, and Exhibit E," he said, producing another sheet, "is the respondent's reply to that email, sent from his verified email address 2 hours later." He handed the new exhibit to the clerk. Copy went to the judge. Gary didn't need a copy. He knew what he had written. Judge Alani looked down at the paper. "Okay," she read aloud, her voice devoid of inflection. She looked at Gary. "Mr. Wilkins." The email address this was sent from, GaryWilkins58@gmail.com. "Is that your email address?" "Yeah. But, and did you send this reply?" Gary's face was turning red. "I might have. I don't know. It's just 2 letters." "Okay. It don't mean anything. It just means I got the email. It's not a signature. It's not a contract." He was shouting now, his voice echoing in the small, quiet room. Judge Alani set the paper down and folded her hands. She looked at Gary, and for the first time a flicker of something other than boredom appeared in her eyes. It was the look of a teacher about to explain a very simple concept to a very dense student. "Mr. Wilkins," she began, her voice taking on a didactic edge. "We are no longer living in the 18th century. The law recognizes that contracts and binding agreements can be formed through modern means of communication, including email. The standard for a binding agreement is not a feathered quill on a piece of parchment. It is a meeting of the minds, an offer, and an acceptance." She picked up the exhibits. "The plaintiff, through her counsel, has presented a clear offer, an email with a subject line that explicitly identifies the attached document as an agreement regarding the vehicle. The email then asks for a specific action to denote acceptance of its terms. A reply of OK from your own email address provided that exact acceptance. The context is clear. The subject is defined. The terms of acceptance are specified. In the eyes of this court and the established precedent of this state, your 2-letter reply in this specific context is as legally binding as if you had signed your name in blood." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Gary stood frozen, his mouth slightly agape. The bluster, the rage, the self-righteous indignation, it all drained out of him, leaving behind a hollow, stunned shell. He looked from the judge to Arthur, then to me. His eyes were wide with a kind of panicked disbelief. He had walked into a knife fight armed with his fists, and the judge had just explained with surgical precision exactly how he had been disemboweled. Behind him Karen had gone pale. Her hand was at her throat. She was finally truly understanding. This wasn't a neighborhood squabble. This was a court of law, and the rules here were not her rules. Judge Alani made a few notes on her pad. The court finds that a provisional lease agreement did exist between the plaintiff and the respondent, and that the respondent has been in breach of that agreement since his refusal to return the vehicle upon demand. Judgment is therefore awarded to the plaintiff. Mr. Wilkins, you are ordered to return the 2014 Ford F-150 to Ms. Bennett's possession no later than 5 p.m. tomorrow. She wasn't finished. Furthermore, the plaintiff has petitioned for financial compensation for breach of contract and damages incurred. They have provided receipts for the initial down payment of $3,200 and have submitted a reasonable estimate of $500 for excessive wear and tear and an additional $100 for the cost of retrieving and detailing the vehicle given the nature of its misuse. She looked up. The court finds these damages to be reasonable. Mr. Wilkins, you are ordered to pay Ms. Bennett the sum of $3,800. A payment schedule can be arranged through the clerk's office. $3,800, my down payment, plus interest. Gary finally found his voice. A strangled croak. I ain't got that kind of money. Then I suggest you find a job, Mr. Wilkins, the judge said without a trace of sympathy. Perhaps one that doesn't require a truck. She banged her gavel. This hearing is concluded. As people began to shuffle out, Arthur Vance stood and addressed the clerk. Your Honor, he said, loud enough for the court recorder to hear. In light of the civil judgment, my client, Ms. Bennett, has instructed me to inform the district attorney's office that she no longer wishes to pursue a criminal complaint in this matter. It was the final move. It was not forgiveness. It was a statement. I had not come here for revenge. I had come here for restitution. The court had given me my property back. The court had given me my money back. The system had worked. A messy, drawn-out criminal case for assault would be an emotional drain with no further material gain. This was cleaner. It was a declaration that he was no longer worth my time. His debt was now to the court, not to me. I had won, and now I was simply closing the file. I stood up, smoothed the front of my jacket, and walked out of the courtroom without a backward glance. She showed up 2 days after the hearing. I had known she would come, but I had expected her to try my house. Instead, she chose my territory, my place of power. It was a tactical error on her part, but Karen's strategies were always based on emotion, not logic. The call came from reception. Ms. Bennett, there's a Karen Wilkins here to see you. She says she's your HOA president. She doesn't have an appointment. The receptionist's voice was laced with a professional disapproval that I appreciated. Thank you, Chloe. I'll be right out. I didn't invite her back to my office. My office was a sanctuary of order and reason, and she was a carrier of chaos. I met her in the lobby, a vast, impersonal space of polished marble and cool leather couches. She was standing by the elevator bank, looking small and out of place, clutching her purse like a life raft. The moment she saw me, her face crumpled and the tears began. It was a performance I had seen 1,000 times, but for the first time it had no effect on me. It was like watching a silent movie with the subtitles turned off. The gestures were dramatic, but they conveyed no meaning. Riley, she sobbed, rushing toward me. She reached for me, but I took a small, deliberate step back, and her hands fell empty at her sides. The rejection registered in her eyes, a flicker of shock, but the performance continued. How could you do this? How could you do this to your own neighborhood? Her voice was a loud whisper intended to be both confidential and dramatic, a sound that drew the discreet attention of the security guard and the receptionist. I did not whisper back. My voice was calm, level, and conversational. Hello, Karen. This is my place of work. It's not an appropriate place for this conversation. I didn't know where else to go, she cried, tears streaming down her cheeks. You won't answer my calls. What you did to Gary in that courtroom, it was horrible. It was cruel. You humiliated him. Neighbors don't take each other to court. There it was, the foundational lie upon which she had built her entire life. The sacred, inviolable rule of community that applied to everyone but her. I looked at her, at this woman who preached standards, while enabling her husband's every violation, and I felt a profound and final sense of detachment. Neighbors don't beat each other with broom handles in the driveway, I said. My voice was as quiet and hard as a river stone. The words stopped her tears for a second. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She had expected me to argue the point, to defend the lawsuit. She had not expected me to state the simple, brutal truth she had spent a month trying to ignore. That was an accident, she finally stammered. A misunderstanding. You pushed him. You know how he gets a temper when he's pushed. I asked him to sign a piece of paper, Karen. A document protecting an asset I paid for. That's not pushing. That's business. And his response was not a temper. It was a violent assault. And you stood there and told me I deserved it. I was upset. I didn't know what I was saying. Yes, you did, I said, And in that moment I knew it was the truest thing I had ever said to her. You knew exactly what you were saying. You made your choice. You chose him. You chose his violence over your neighbor's safety. You have been making that choice for years. The courtroom was just the consequence. She began crying again, this time with a frantic, desperate edge. This wasn't the performance anymore. This was fear. The consequences were finally becoming real to her, and she couldn't stand it. She grabbed my arm, her fingers surprisingly strong. You have to fix this, Riley. Please. He has to give the truck back. The judge said so. But the money, we don't have that money. How is he supposed to pay you if he can't work? And the insurance thing you did? He can't get the truck insured anywhere now. It's all on some permanent record. You have to get his name off of it. You work in insurance. You know people. You can make a call. You can delete the file. I looked down at her hand on my arm, then back up at her face. The sheer, breathtaking ignorance of her request was almost stunning. She thought the NICB database was like a high school report card, a demerit I could erase with a word to the principal. She did not understand that I had not set a fire. I had merely sounded the alarm. And the institutional fire brigades that had responded were now beyond my control, even if I wished to recall them, which I did not. I can't do that, I said, gently but firmly, removing her hand from my sleeve. What do you mean you can't? She wailed. Of course you can. You did this. You can undo it. You're ruining his life. No, I said, and my voice was colder than the marble floor beneath our feet. He did. He made a series of choices. He chose to hit me. He chose to ignore a legal notice. He chose to lie and misuse my property. He chose to stand in a courtroom and commit perjury. Every single one of those choices belongs to him. I took a small breath. Every action has a consequence, Karen. That is the single most important rule in the world. It's the foundation of my entire career. I assess the consequences of actions. Gary is now experiencing the consequences of his. This is not my fault. This is his bill finally coming due. She stared at me, her tear-streaked face a mask of disbelief and betrayal. She saw me not as a person but as an instrument, a tool that was refusing to function as designed. I was the emergency credit card that was suddenly declined. So you're not going to help us? She said, her voice flat, the tears finally spent. I am never going to help him again, I corrected her. And I can no longer help you because helping you always means helping him. The two are the same. I'm done paying for his mistakes. And I'm done paying for yours. It was the final line, the last clause in a contract that was now officially terminated. I could see in her eyes that she finally understood. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a judgment. I am your HOA president, she whispered. One last futile appeal to an authority I no longer recognized. And I was your neighbor, I replied. I have to get back to work now. I turned and walked away. I did not look back to see if she was still standing there. I did not listen for the sound of her footsteps leaving the lobby. I walked back to my desk, sat down in my chair, and stared at the actuarial tables on my screen until the numbers stopped swimming and resolved back into focus. That evening, when I got home, I opened my phone. I went to her contact. I looked at the word Karen for a long moment, then I pressed block. I did the same for her email address. I did the same for Gary's number, which I had kept for purely informational purposes. It was not a dramatic emotional act. It was a simple administrative task. It was the closing of a file. It was the cancellation of a policy that had proven, over a lifetime of claims, to be a catastrophic, unmitigated loss. The silence that followed was not empty. It was the sound of peace. The weeks after the lobby confrontation and the subsequent digital severing were the quietest of my adult life. The silence was so profound, so absolute, it was almost a physical presence. At first I kept expecting my phone to ring with a blocked number or an email to slip through a filter from a newly created account. I braced myself for a knock on my house door, but nothing came. It seemed that, without a direct line to my guilt or my bank account, I simply ceased to exist for them. The silence I had paid for in installments for years was now mine, free and clear. But I knew that true security wasn't just about blocking old points of access. It was about building a new, more fortified perimeter. My phone number and personal email address were casualties of the war. Compromised assets. Keeping them felt like living in a house where the enemy still had a key. 2 weeks after I last saw Karen, I spent a Saturday afternoon performing a complete digital overhaul. I ported my old number to a burner SIM card, which I then shut away in a desk drawer, a dead end for any lingering attempts at contact. I walked into a Verizon store and opened a new account with a new number, one that I gave only to my office, my bank, and 3 trusted friends. I created a new primary email address, complex, unguessable string of letters and numbers. Then came the tedious but necessary work of updating my information across dozens of accounts. A digital cleansing that felt like changing the locks on my entire life. Each updated profile, each confirmed change was a small, satisfying click of a deadbolt sliding into place. The following month I sold my car. It was a perfectly sensible sedan, a car I had bought for its safety rating and resale value. It was a vehicle chosen by the underwriter in me, but it felt tied to the past. The car I had driven on countless reluctant trips to Karen's house. I sold it to a dealership for a fair price and took an Uber home for a week. I enjoyed the freedom of not owning a car in a city with excellent public transport, but I knew I needed a vehicle for the life I was starting to envision, one that involved mountains and solitude. I didn't go to a traditional dealership. I ordered it online, a process as clean and impersonal as I could have wished for. It was a small electric car, Polestar 2, in a dark metallic gray that reminded me of mountain rock. It was the antithesis of the F-150. Quiet, efficient, technologically advanced, and compact. It was a vehicle designed for one person to move through the world with a minimal footprint. When it was delivered, I stood in my house building's garage and just looked at it. It was mine. The title was digital, secured in an online portal under my name alone. The insurance was a simple personal policy. This purpose was not to haul lumber or enable a deadbeat. This purpose was to carry me toward my future. I told no one about it. The quiet hum of its engine as I pulled out of the garage for the first time was the sound of a new beginning. The old Riley had been a creature of rigid habit. My vacation days were planned 6 months in advance, usually for a week in the winter to go skiing. My work schedule was sacrosanct. I was the one who always covered for others, who never took a sick day, whose reliability was a cornerstone of my professional identity. So, in the middle of a sweltering July, when I walked into my director's office and requested the following Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday off, he was visibly surprised. "Everything okay, Riley?" he asked, a genuine concern in his eyes. "Everything's perfect," I said, and the smile that spread across my face felt completely natural. "I just need a few days to myself. A little road trip." "Well, you've certainly earned it," he said, approving the request in the system. "Have a great time." My colleagues were even more surprised. "A spontaneous vacation from you?" my friend Sarah teased from the next cubicle. "Did you hit your head?" "Something like that," I replied, laughing. I was breaking my own patterns. I was becoming unpredictable even to myself. And it felt wonderful. On that Wednesday morning, I didn't set an alarm. I woke naturally with the sun, packed a single duffel bag, and carried it down to my new car. The destination I typed into the navigation system was not a hotel or a resort. It was a set of coordinates. My coordinates. For the past 5 years, a portion of every bonus. Every raise had been automatically diverted into a separate high-yield savings account I had labeled Sanctuary Fund. It was my one secret indulgence. My long-term plan for a future I wasn't sure I'd ever reach. I had watched it grow, a quiet promise to myself. 6 months ago, months before the incident with the truck, I had finally hit my goal. Through a discreet rural real estate agent, I had bought a tiny one-room cabin on 3 acres of land bordering a national forest about 2 hours west of Denver. It was little more than a shed with plumbing, but it was surrounded by aspen and pine trees, and from its small front porch you could see a snow-capped peak. I had bought it with cash. The entire transaction was done digitally. I was the sole owner of a small but quiet piece of the Rocky Mountains. I hadn't even seen it in person yet. The drive was a revelation. The city fell away, replaced by rolling foothills, and then the sharp, dramatic rise of the mountains. The electric engine was nearly silent, allowing the sounds of the road and the wind to fill the cabin of the car. I felt a lightness in my chest, an absence of the familiar low-grade anxiety that had been my constant companion for years. There was no one to call and check in with. No one was expecting me. My time, for the first time, was completely and utterly my own. The final road was unpaved, a gravel track that wound up through a thick forest. My phone lost its signal, and I didn't care. The navigation system had downloaded the map. I was disconnected. I was free. I saw the cabin exactly when the GPS said I would. It was tucked into a small clearing, smoke gray wood blending in with the trees. It was smaller than I had imagined and more perfect. I parked the car and got out. The air was thin and clean, smelling of pine needles and damp earth. The only sound was the wind whispering through the high branches of the trees. I walked to the front door, my boots crunching on the gravel path. The key, which the agent had mailed to my office, was a simple, old-fashioned brass key. It slid into the lock with a satisfying click. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The interior was simple, a wood-burning stove, a small kitchenette, a built-in bed platform in the corner, and a single large picture window that looked out at the mountain peak. The previous owner had left a sturdy wooden table and 2 chairs. It was everything I needed and nothing I didn't. It was the physical manifestation of the life I wanted to build. Solid, self-sufficient, and with a clear, beautiful view. I spent the next 3 days in a state of quiet bliss. I unpacked my bag. I made coffee on the stove. I sat on the porch for hours reading a novel, feeling the sun on my face. I went for long hikes on the trails that started just past my property line, my legs aching with the good, clean burn of exertion. I saw a deer and her fawn. I saw a sky so filled with stars it looked like spilled diamonds. In all that time, I did not think once about Gary or Karen. It wasn't a conscious effort to block them out. They simply had no place there. My mind, which for so long had been occupied with managing their crisis, mitigating their damage, and anticipating their next demand, was finally empty. And into that emptiness new thoughts began to flow. Thoughts about what I wanted, not what I needed to do or what I should do, but what I wanted. I wanted more of this silence. I wanted more of this peace. I wanted to feel the sun on my face and the ache in my legs. On the final morning, as I packed my bag to leave, I felt a pang of sadness. But it was quickly replaced by a deep, abiding joy. This wasn't goodbye. This was my place now. I could come back next weekend if I wanted to. I had built myself a refuge. The underwriter who had spent her life insuring the assets of others had finally secured her own, and it was priceless. The drive back down from the mountains was the reverse of my ascent. Not just in geography but in spirit. I had driven up to the cabin burdened by the weight of a life I had endured. I was driving back feeling lighter than I had in years, carrying only the promise of a life I was actively choosing. The electric car hummed along the highway, a quiet vessel of my newfound peace. The silence in the car was a comfortable one, filled not with unspoken tensions but with the simple, clean sound of the wind and the road. I was returning not to a fortress but to a home. I was about 20 minutes outside of Denver, the skyline just beginning to resolve itself from the hazy distance, when my phone buzzed in its cradle on the dashboard. The car's screen lit up with an incoming call. It was an unknown number, a local area code I didn't recognize. For a brief, fleeting moment the old instincts kicked in. A jolt of anxiety, the familiar dread of an unexpected crisis. Who could it be? A client? A wrong number? Or was it them, somehow circumventing the digital walls I had built? I let it ring. I watched the number flash on the screen, my hand steady on the steering wheel. The old Riley would have answered immediately, her stomach in knots, her mind already racing to solve a problem that wasn't hers. The new Riley simply observed. The call was a data point, an uninvited query from the outside world. I was under no obligation to respond. After 4 rings it went to voicemail. I felt nothing. No curiosity, no fear, just a quiet sense of control. I had a choice, and my choice was silence. Less than a minute later the phone buzzed again. This time it was a text message from the same number. I glanced at the screen. A wall of text, frantic and riddled with the typos of desperation, filled the notification banner. Riley answer. It's Karen. I'm using Barbara's phone. Gary was in an accident. The truck is wrecked. They towed it. It's at an impound lot. We need $600 for the tow fee or they won't release it. Please, honey. It's a disaster. I don't know what to do. Call me. I read the message once, then a second time. I felt the words not as an emotional plea but as the final, inevitable paragraph in a long and tedious claims report. I pulled into the right lane, took the next exit, and parked in the quiet lot of a suburban park. I turned the car off. The silence was now absolute. I analyzed the text with the cool detachment of my profession. Gary was in an accident, a predictable outcome, a high-risk operator in a high-risk vehicle. I wondered if he had been speeding, as the telematics had so often shown. I wondered if he had been coming from the watering hole, as his daily pattern suggested. I wondered if anyone else had been hurt. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. Not of sympathy but of grim, vindicated foresight. I had told the insurance company that he was a catastrophic liability risk. The risk had now been realized. The truck is wrecked. The asset was a total loss. The F-150, the great silver horse he was supposed to ride into a new life of prosperity, was now a mangled heap of steel and glass. The symbol of his supposed independence had become the monument to his failure. The court had ordered him to return it to me, an order he had been appealing and delaying for months. Now it would be returned in pieces, if at all. The insurance policy was void. The loan was still in my name. I would have to deal with the fallout, the collection agency, the hit to my credit. But that was just money. It was a quantifiable, manageable loss, a final administrative fee for closing this account forever. We need $600 for the tow fee. This was the sentence that sealed it all. After the lies, the manipulation, the theft, the court case, the judgment ordering him to pay me thousands of dollars. After all of it, their immediate instinctive reaction to a new crisis was to turn to me for a bailout. They had learned nothing. Their entire worldview was built on the foundation that I was their emergency fund, their perpetual insurer against the consequences of their own actions. The text message wasn't just a plea for help. It was proof. It was the final, irrefutable piece of evidence that my decision had not been cruel but necessary. It was not an act of revenge but an act of survival. I looked at the number on the screen. Karen, having found her own number blocked, had immediately sought out a new line of attack, borrowing a neighbor's phone to bypass my defenses. It was a predictable tactic. I was a problem to be solved, a vault to be cracked. My thumb hovered over the screen. I could have replied. I could have sent a torrent of rage, a final blistering summary of all their sins. I could have sent a single cold sentence. This is not my problem. But I did neither. Words were pointless. They were a currency we no longer shared. Instead, I performed a simple, quiet action. I tapped the number. I scrolled down the contact options and I pressed block. A small pop-up asked for confirmation. I pressed it without hesitation. The last bridge was gone. The last line of communication was severed. The silence was now complete, permanent, and absolute. I started the car and pulled back onto the road. I drove the rest of the way home, not in anger but in a state of profound, unshakable peace. The war was over. I had won. But the victory did not feel like a triumph. Felt like a return to zero, a restoration of the balance that had been stolen from me for so long. I pulled into the driveway of my house building and pressed the remote. The garage door rumbled open, revealing the clean, well-lit space. My designated parking spot was number 27. It was a corner spot right against the concrete wall. It was the exact spot where 6 months ago I had handed Gary the keys to the F-150. The exact spot where he had laughed at my paperwork. The exact spot where he had swung a broom handle and cracked the bone in my wrist. The memory was no longer a hot flash of pain and shock. It was a cold, clear image. A scene from a movie about someone else's life. I saw the rage on his face. I saw Karen's betrayal in her eyes. I felt the phantom thud against my arm. I steered my small, silent electric car into the garage. I did not park quickly. I moved slowly, deliberately. I lined the tires up perfectly. I pulled forward until the front sensor gave a soft chime. I put the car in park and powered it down. The low hum of the electric motor faded into complete silence. I sat there for a long moment, my hands resting on the wheel. My new car, my symbol of quiet independence and a clean future, was now parked in the precise square of concrete where I had been assaulted. I was not just claiming the space. I was cleansing it. I was overriding a memory of violence and humiliation with a new reality of peace and control. The ghost was exorcised. The ground was reconsecrated. This was my space now. I got out of the car, locked the doors, and walked toward the elevator. I did not look back. The past was a closed file, a settled claim. My future was waiting, quiet and vast and promising, like the view from my cabin in the mountains. And for the first time there were no more risks to mitigate. There was only life waiting to be lived.